I've lived here since 1987, but I first worked here in 1984. So I just came here briefly and did my first experimental excavation then. The oldest thing I found actually goes back to the Tang Dynasty. There's some Chinese coins of the Tang period, but obviously they were not brought here at that time, they came later. But they were already made in China in probably the 9th century. We know that Chinese coins stayed in circulation for a long period of time. So they were using Chinese coins as money in Singapore, even though they were hundreds of years old at the time. So in the 14th century, when they started having a cash economy here, then they still used the Chinese currency. So in the same site we find Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming coins of several different dynasties. So it was all mixed up, but it just shows how important money was to the Singapore economy during the 14th century period. The most of what we find here is pottery, ceramics, because they don't decay. Once a pot is made, it's immortal, unless you grind it into powder. But other than that, a piece of pottery is going to last forever. So we have literally hundreds of thousands of pieces of pottery from the 14th century. Some we can date very easily because it is Chinese. About half of it is Chinese. And Chinese pottery is very well known from sites in China and historical sources. And the other half is Malay pottery, and that is much less well known. So we have these huge quantities of ceramics, about half imported. So this is a very large percentage. In my experience, this is the largest proportion of Chinese ceramics of any site of this period in early Southeast Asia. So it shows that there was a quite thriving export-import trade here. And from Singapore, some of it was exported outward. We know that because we find it down in Riau, up in Johor. So Singapore was the connecting point, which had its own hinterland, both in Johor and down in the Riau archipelago. So we can look at the types of things we find here, compare with what we find in Johor, Riau, and we can be pretty sure that it came in through here in exchange for the local products from down in the region. Yeah, so this is one of the nicer pieces. It's a 14th century Chinese little bowl. It's not very big, but it's very thin. So it took a lot of skill to make that. And it's got this beautiful glaze, which is the most popular kind of color in Singapore. This very nice bluish green color. And it's got a couple fish. And this decoration is quite common in Chinese vessels of this period. Represents, harmony, matrimonial fidelity, and so on. It was a very popular kind of a motif to use. And we know it came from probably the Long Chuan area in Zhejiang province. Yeah, we can actually pinpoint the origin of this pretty well. So it was a relatively high quality piece of pottery for that period. And there were a number of historical sources that had to do with Singapore. There was the Millennials. The Millennials is the best known one. Talks about the founding of the first Malay kingdom in Singapore. There are many versions of that. Raffles was aware of it. They give us the names of 5 kings. And we cannot confirm the existence of the first 4, but the last one we can confirm because he shows up in Chinese sources. By the 1320s already, Singapore was in contact with China. We have Chinese references to Chinese coming here, possibly even living here. And so we know that there were Chinese coming here, at least for trade, and that they also wrote about Singapore's society. They said what kinds of things can Chinese buy and sell here. We have one reference in a Vietnamese source, interestingly enough. And then there are 2 Javanese sources. One is dated 1365, and it says Temasek was one of Majapahit's vassals, the Kingdom of Java at that time. There's another one which is written in the 15th century in Java also, which records the oath of the Prime Minister of Majapahit that he was going to conquer all of Southeast Asia, and he listed Temasek as one of the specific places he wanted to conquer. The most valuable thing I found probably was this little bit of gold wire, which is maybe 5 grams. Nothing that we find is, it didn't used to be valuable. Now collectors are actually starting to get interested in broken pieces of Chinese pottery even. So some of them potentially could be valuable in the future, but today, they have no market value.